Whether you're having the best weekend of your life or like me, spent yesterday cleaning the garage, I'm glad that you are here. My name is Matt Stefan. I'm part of the leadership team here at Dwell Church. We're a 2.5-year-old church plant built on the 5 following core values. We want to be Jesus-centered, research-based, trauma-informed, diverse, affirming, and inclusive. And we're exploring what does it look and feel like to build a church built on those things. But the big picture is we're on a quest. We're going to build a church where anyone can take a step closer to Jesus. So even if this is your only time ever at Dwell Church, I hope that just for a minute you feel invited closer, one step closer to Jesus. Grateful that you're here. Got a couple things going on, but one of them is if you are here and you haven't yet connected with us and gotten on our mailing list, we would love to be able to connect with you, hear your story, see how we could serve you. And as you'll see in a minute, we put a lot of good resources in our weekly email. Big, long, beautiful resources. You can get them. Get on that list. We're also building out our connections team. This is one of my favorite things, and I have hogged this job all to myself for the last 2.5 years, being the greeter out there up front. But it is time for me to share the beautiful, sacred goodness of telling someone how much God loves them just with a simple hello and happy Sunday. You too, my friends, could be a part of the Dwell Church Connections team. If you want to do that, you can text connection to 650-399-7238. That's not my phone number, but it will get you on the connections team. We'll put this up at the end of service, or you can also sign up through our weekly email once you get on that list. We also are working on week 3 of this series of teachings called You Become What You Love. Have you ever sat down and thought about what it is that you loved? I love making slides. This sermon has 50 slides in it. So if each one is 30 seconds, it'll be 25 minutes. We'll finish early. That's the goal. Part of this talk is about what do we love as a church, and part of what we do to maintain our truest, deepest love is to be an organization with maximal transparency. So that's why I'm telling you, we've got 50 slides. Maximal transparency right there. Let's do a recap. This is a series about love, about worship, and the book of Leviticus, my friends. It's the best. It's the weirdest thing in there. But if you get just a little bit below the surface, it opens up with some real genuine goodness, which we'll get into here. We've got to talk about the book of Leviticus. We have a sense in our world that we're coming out of one world and into another world. I think we have that feeling. Everything is changing. And that's exactly how the people in the book of Leviticus felt. That everyone was changing. They were having to reorganize their daily lives around the changes that they were experiencing. The book of Leviticus. But the big idea in this series is something called orthocardia. Orthodoxy is right belief, and we know from 500 years of Protestants arguing with one another and then starting new denominations that we cannot settle on orthodoxy. We cannot settle on right belief, aside from a few key things like Jesus' resurrection. There's something called orthopraxy, which is right behavior, and if you're a human, you know that even if you knew the right behavior, that doesn't necessarily mean that you would do it. So we also know that right behavior is not the pathway to human flourishing. Instead, the Bible suggests to us, with staggering clarity actually, it's easy to miss, but it's staggeringly clear, that what will define you the most is what you love, right love. That's what we're talking about. We've been reflecting on this philosopher here, James K.A. Smith, who wrote this instruction bit right here, this bit of insight. Being a disciple of Jesus is not primarily a matter of getting to the right ideas and doctrines and beliefs into your head in order to guarantee proper behavior. Rather, it is a matter of being the kind of person who loves rightly. And from this point of view, it situates our life journey as someone who is slowly being formed into someone who loves something or another. You're slowly having your loving capacity shaped. Shockingly, this is precisely what Jesus said. When asked, what is the most important thing? Jesus said this: love. Love is the most important thing. And not only that you love, it is what you love. You should love the Lord God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. This isn't sneaky Jesus slipping in an extra commandment. He's not trying to get more rules onto your shoulders. He is saying that there is a very close association between these two, such that they cannot be mentioned separately. You cannot love God without loving your neighbor. And by implication, every time someone loves someone else, their God is present, even if unnamed. Loving God and loving neighbor. Deep association in Jesus' mind. This is precisely what James K. A. Smith is talking about. What you love and how you love it will be the thing that defines you the most. N.T. Wright said this about love and worship: one of the primary laws of human life is that you become like what you worship. This is why God is so grumpy about idolatry. If we are worshiping violent and exploitational gods, we will become violent and exploitational people. But if we worship a loving God who loves us, we will learn to love our neighbors. And what is more, you reflect what you worship, not only back to the object of worship, but also to the surrounding world. You know as well as I do that when I am loving the wrong thing, sometimes I am the last to know it, which means everyone else sees it first. Everyone else can see what you love. Your body radiates, your life radiates what it is that you love. All right, Blood, Guts, and Fire, a audio commentary on the book of Leviticus, which I spent a lot of Claude tokens converting into a written text. So please, someone download and read some of this. It's so good. This is one of my top 10 all-time books. It helps us grasp the spiritual formation necessary to come out of one world and go into another world. The book of Leviticus has some lowlights. I've been reading this extremely weird verse, and I got to tell you, I keep thinking it's going to get a bigger laugh, but I think it's just too weird for you to even laugh out loud about. So anyways, here's one of the weird ones. I've been reading it every week, and then I wait for the laugh. No one laughs, so we'll just skip that part this time. But there are some profound highlights in the book of Leviticus. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason truthfully with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. For I am Yahweh who rescued you from Egypt. Love your neighbor as yourself. We imagine that it was Jesus who introduced this into the stream of the intellectual history of humanity, but no, right here, book of Leviticus. Also, highlight right here. When a foreigner sojourns among you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the foreigner who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. The high water mark of human spirituality is here in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus 25 is a command that once every 50 years, all of the debts shall be forgiven, all the prisoners should be released for prison, and all of the land that has been sold shall return to its original owners. It is a grand vision of a truly just and equitable economic arrangement. It is about the ordering of society. They're learning to do life differently. And the issue for them is that they had come out of Egypt, which valued some bodies over others, and they are now learning to live Yahweh's way, which is a just and equitable arrangement. Leviticus shows the movement away from Egypt, where some bodies were worth more than others, and towards the profound, profound equity of living in the vision of this God. This is actually at the beginning of the next book of the Bible, but the arc from Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers shows the profound reordering of society. This is the instructions on how they're supposed to sleep every night. They're wandering through the desert, and when they set up all their tents, there's the tabernacle, which is where God is present there in the middle, and then each tribe has their own place. And it says in the Bible, one of those chapters that we all skim past, when you camp at night, it should be in this order, and this is their way of saying we're reordering society, and now everyone has equal access to God. No one is far from God in our imagination. Everyone is equally close to him. No life is valued over another. God is speaking to all of us. They have reordered society. This is part of the ethical and spiritual vision of the book of Leviticus. And Leviticus shows the relationship between the body, like what you do with your body every day, where you sleep. That's a picture of where people are supposed to sleep. What you do with your body, how you worship, what you love, and what you become. That's what's going on in the book of Leviticus. And this is the same principle of you become what you worship. And Yahweh tells them again and again, you will be holy the way I am holy. And we tend to beat each other over the head with the word holiness, as in you're not good enough. But what it means here is love. We've seen that God wants us to love. This is saying my love is so powerful and transformative. Holiness is the right word for it. Love the way that I love. in a transforming and sacrificial way. So last week we talked about ordering our own loves, thinking in our own heart what we love. Here was the analogy. Just as Israel needed a different spiritual formation to move beyond Egypt, we need a spiritual formation to resist the ordering of our world. And we looked at some research that said if we got to put it on a list, we would say we tend to love things, use people, and assume transcendence. That's a good summary of what American culture does to you. Love things, use people, assume transcendence. And this particular researcher was saying we have that exactly backwards. We must love people, use things, and seek transcendence. We're undergoing a spiritual formation in the wrong direction, so we must ask ourselves, how do we resist the order of our world? Well, we need to reorder our loves. We were looking and seeing what is actually in our heart. And we got help from this highly neurotic person, St. Augustine of Canterbury. He's one of the more anxious and guilty-feeling people in Christian history. And sometimes we can be formed by that anxiety. He was deeply anxious about his own body. He was probably some kind of sex addict, is what researchers and historians think, before he became a pastor. And a lot of his writings are on the deep shame that he had around his own body, and we can be formed by that too. But he found deep freedom from several addictions in this idea that you can love things the wrong way. He assessed himself to be loving certain things the wrong way. And he thought that his solution was to learn to love them the right way. Here's what he wrote. For though it be good, it may be loved with an evil as well as a good love. It is loved rightly when it is loved ordinately or in the right order. It is evilly loved when inordinately. For love itself is to be ordinately loved, because we do well to love that which, when we love it, makes us live well and virtuously, so that it seems to me that it is a brief but true definition of virtue to say it is the order of, that virtue is the order of love. And then he said this, I love this quote because this guy is just as crazy as I am. Ready for this one? Now he is a man of just and holy life who forms an unprejudiced estimate of things and keeps his affections also under strict control, so that he neither loves what he ought not to love, nor fails to love what he ought to love, nor loves that more which he ought to be loved less, nor loves that which equally ought to be loved either more or less, nor loves that less or more which ought to be loved equally. He's overthinking it. The human condition is this, he's telling us. We love the wrong things too much and the right things too little. And so how do we deal with that? How do we assess this? We said that the best way to do it is to pray this prayer, Psalm 139, search me, O God. Know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any wicked way, offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. The best way to find out what you love is to ask God to look at what is in your heart. And today, as a church, we're going to begin a process, which we'll do a lot through the fall, of asking ourselves, as a church, what is in our heart? The third of this series of talks is about this. How do we build a church that loves the right things? There's a famous essay by Dallas Willard called Living in the Vision of the Kingdom of God, and he details how Christian movements throughout history, over 2,000 years of Christian history, start the same way, with a profound and pure vision of walking with Jesus, a vision of Jesus and his kingdom. And slowly, time and again, every few hundred years, that vision, that movement that started with a pure vision of walking with Jesus, ends with defending institutions. The institution becomes the vision. And so the question before us today is, how do we become a church that could keep its eyes on Jesus instead of prioritizing the institutional stuff that we might build? It's a perennial problem for followers of Jesus. We're going to explore the commitments we're making to do that. When you're in seminary, they give you a lot of sermon outlines to keep in your head. The most famous, of course, is the 3-point sermon. Sure, you heard a lot of those. That has kind of a linear aspect to it, but again, this is partly a sermon about organizational transparency. So here's the structure of this sermon. There's one theme in the middle, and I'm going to do some non-linear journeys around each flower and come back to that singular central theme. And you'll put it together yourself. The theme is this: building a church that can actually love something besides itself. How do we become that kind of place? I want to tell you a bit of my story. The first is about this guy. You might know about me that I grew up in a church that a documentary was made about. It was not a healthy place, although for me, sometimes it was a happy place. I had fun there. People loved me. They taught me how to read the Bible, and it took me a long time, a lot of therapy, and a lot of processing to know there were very good parts in that for me. There are also deep wounds that I carried for a long time. I felt a call to be a pastor in the 10th grade, but I also had made a commitment by then to never go inside a church ever again, so it was a really complicated time for me. I went to seminary thinking that I would be an Old Testament professor, and my plan was like the classroom will be kind of like a church, and my lectures will be like sermons, and it's close enough that it counts to fulfill my calling. And when I went to Fuller Seminary, there was a guy named Barry Taylor who used to be the road manager and guitar tech for the band AC/DC. He traveled all those years with AC/DC, and then once he retired from his life on the road doing rock and roll, he became a theology professor. He was at Fuller Seminary, and my early days there, I heard him give a lecture where he said that he thought every church in America should be burned to the ground and we should start completely over. And I was like, I'm in the right place. I love this guy. Let's go get it. Theology beyond religion. Let's go. I had this profound redemptive moment watching this guy who I knew wanted to burn down every church in America. He was sitting at like a, end of the year colloquium thing with some other professors, and he was having this lovely conversation with a woman named Dr. Gorman. And I knew that Dr. Gorman was the first female PhD student to graduate from Fuller Seminary. And later I would read some of her work. Her PhD was in elementary age spiritual formation in a Sunday morning context, or Sunday school. And so she had a PhD in Sunday school, and I watched at this special lunch Barry Taylor, the burn churches to the ground guy, sit next to the Sunday school PhD lady, and they were just having a delightful time together. And I was so moved that those two people could be friends. And I was like, yes, I thought I was going to love just the Barry Taylor aspect, but I am in love with a place where they could talk about these things openly, completely transformative for me. So I'm sinking my brain, I'm marinating my brain at a time where I'm thinking, let's burn down the churches and let's talk nicely to the Sunday school people. How do we do that? I was intending to be a theology professor of some kind, but to finish my graduate degree, I needed an internship, 2 internships actually, at a church. I'd sworn an oath to not go into church, so I was feeling extremely anxious about having to work for free in a church for the better part of a year. Behind my apartment in Los Angeles, there was an alleyway, and it was great because it was too small to like bring a trash can down there, so it was mostly clean, and I had this lawn chair, and every morning before I rode my bike to work in the library, I would sit for 10 minutes in this alleyway in this lawn chair, and I would just listen for the voice of Jesus the way that we do together. And sometimes I left frustrated, and sometimes I left discouraged, and sometimes I left having heard nothing, but sometimes I left with immense gratitude, and every once in a while I left with a nugget that I remained convinced that I might have been hearing from Jesus. Here's one. I was praying about how anxious I was that I was going to have to go work in this church. And Katie and I, we were dating at the time. We go to this church once a month, and it was one of the first places where I heard the pastor talk about, not that he knew all the answers, but that his job was to be the chief mistake maker, that his job was to share the mistakes that he had made on his journey. And I was like, maybe this is a place where I could re-engage my faith in a public way. So I was praying, and I was kind of mad that I was going to have to go work in this church, and I was complaining to God about it, and I heard this moment where it seemed like Jesus was whispering to me, Matt, I love my churches, even when they're lost. I love them. I just do. And I felt the ache that I might associate with Jesus when he describes himself as a shepherd looking for his lost sheep. That even when they're lost, he loves them. And I was wrestling through, how could churches be, as they sometimes have been for a lot of us, how could they be damaging places and places where Jesus is still present? How could it be both? I was wrestling through that. Then on the first day of my internship at this church, the very first thing they gave me was Bill Hybels' book. And I was like, see, Jesus, this place sucks. Because Bill Hybels often thought of as a bad guy who did a lot of bad things over his years as a pastor of the biggest church in America. And in that book, what they wanted us to take away was this one phrase, that the local church was the hope of the world. That's what they wanted to impress upon us. And I sat in this internship on my very first day in this room of future pastors, and I thought, I disagree with every single word of that, because the local church is not the hope of the world. Jesus is the hope of the world. And isn't this Bill Hybels confusing his church with Jesus? When it should be that Jesus is the hope of the world, he was saying, no, it's my organization that I built. That's what the hope of the world is. Isn't that the most basest, most profound idolatry that we could imagine? And so I was wrestling through this experience of living the contradiction of all of those things being true at the same time. A final piece of the puzzle for me was exploring something called spiritual abuse. And if you have had a season of your life where you walked away wounded from a church, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. I got to hear Jeff Van Vonderen speak a number of times. The definition of spiritual abuse is this: when someone uses my spirituality for their own purposes. And from that perspective, in one way or another, any church that was prioritizing building itself and its status over the own spiritual flourishing of the people like you and me, that was always on some level abusive. And it was so helpful for me. It clicked into place. How do we build churches that cannot but help to bless the people that come through the pews? That's the main game. And I walked away from these internships saying, I think my life's calling is to build churches that are emotionally healthy places where people come and they flourish. Finally, there was a bit at Fuller Seminary called the emergent church, which I was briefly into. Has anyone ever heard this phrase before? Emergent? One? Yes. There was a whole department, sociologists studying the phenomenon of the emergent church. The idea of the emergent church in the early 2000s was, how do we build a church that has no organization, has no leader, no schedule, no building? It just emerges from the goodness of people doing their own work to follow Jesus. And I used to love to go to these things, and there were some in Los Angeles, and they were quite lovely. And then just Christianity Today ran an article 2 years ago about whatever happened to the emergent church, and it was easy. They said it didn't have any leaders. Of course it didn't have legs. Of course it couldn't move forward. An institutionalist church was demonstrably not the solution to the problem of churches doing wrong in the world. The other thing that happened to the emergent church leaders, the ones that were successful, all became Instagram pastors. And so either they were eaten alive by the status seeking, or they fizzled out, because you can't have a group of people doing stuff together forever without some plan, right? We all can organically, intuitively say we understand why that didn't work. All right, a bit about Leviticus and Ephesians. How are we doing on time? Terrible. Way off the mark here with my 30 seconds per slide. I'm going to catch up. Ephesians gives us this grand vision of what Jesus is doing in assembling us together, of drawing us together by the power of his presence and his Spirit. And fascinatingly, in our journey through this series, there's also a bunch of hyperlinks of allusions and references to the book of Leviticus that if we pay attention, we will see. But Old Testament scholars tell us that the ethical beauty of the book of Leviticus is never on record as having transpired. That the beautiful vision of the year of Jubilee, of all that forgiveness, we have lots of economic record from the Bronze Age, and there is nothing like the year of Jubilee happening. The Old Testament scholarship's best guess is no one ever did that. And so part of what we are hearing in the work of Jesus is rebooting the program of building a Leviticus vision of the world where all people are equal. And so Paul writes this in the second chapter of Ephesians. Now, you who were once far off from God have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Remember the portrait of where you're supposed to sleep? God is arranging the nearness of his people, but here already we have this concession that some people were not drawn near by the vision of Leviticus. For Jesus is our peace. In his flesh he has made both groups, Jews and Gentiles, into one, and has broken down the dividing wall, that is the hostility between us. He has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances. Not that he is canceling the book of Leviticus, but that he is fulfilling them. In Jesus' day and age, the law and the commandments and all the rituals became exclusionary cultural boundaries instead of the inclusive vision that they were originally penned with. He did this so that he might create in himself one new humanity in the place of two, and thus making peace, that he might reconcile both groups to God in one body through the cross, and thus putting to death the hostility that transpires between humans. so that he came and proclaimed peace to those who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through him, both of us has access to the Spirit and the Father. All have access. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but citizens with the saints and also the members. You are also members of the household of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the cornerstone. In him the whole structure is joined together and grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are built together spiritually into a dwelling place for God. The vision of Leviticus somehow fulfilled and brought into our midst through the work of Jesus. This is the grand vision that you and I are invited into. And as we work to build church, as we work to build a church, we are instantiating this grand vision. All right, meta-modernity. Better really get going on this one. Okay. Earlier I made the case to you, or at least I made the claim, that we're living on the edge of one thing, a world that is ending, and moving into a world that is beginning. And in some way we can all feel that. There's a lot of philosophical work that narrates the transition between worlds. So there's three that influence our lives: modernism, postmodernism, and what is emerging now called metamodernism. And this unlocks something for me about what I think Dwell Church is and is called to. The structure of human knowledge, the way that we understand human knowledge or epistemology of each of these three phases of human history goes like this. In the modern era, we thought truth was objective. It was universal, rational, and discoverable. In the postmodern era, we said, how come the guys with all the money and guns have all the objective truth? How did that happen? And so instead, we decided that truth is not objective and universal. It is instead completely relative. That truth is socially constructed and often tied to power. Now, we're moving beyond that. And in metamodernism, we say this, that truth exists, but it is complex and multi-layered. It is somehow aspects of both of those. If you are a married person, you know the problem of the objective and subjective negotiation between two people, two parties. If one spouse said, you said this, the other spouse will almost always say, no, I didn't. Or they'll say, that's not what I meant. They're negotiating the relationship between the objective and subjective truth. In modernity, we thought it was just the bare facts, who said what when. But in the subjective era, we thought it didn't matter. The tone is what mattered, and that's real too. And in the metamodern, we're existing in a world where we're going to acknowledge both are true. That I'm an objective person having a highly subjective experience. You too are an objective person having a highly subjective experience. And we're going to put our subjective experiences into contact with one another, and it's going to be messy and sometimes quite beautiful. And that's the best we can say is what truth is. The core attitude of modernity is earnest optimism, belief in human progress. We're going to do it, we're going to build it. The core attitude, often associated with, like Seinfeld, there is nothing, there's a show about nothing. Irony, cynicism, and systemic suspicion. Here are the key phrases for us. Meta-modernity has the tone of voice of informed naivety or pragmatic idealism. It's important to me, and I know it'll be messy, and I'm going to do it anyways. The key image in modernity is the building, that knowledge is a set of facts stacked up on one another. And that's why growing up our faith felt so fragile that if we toppled the building, we asked any question, it was all going to fall over. In modernity, the idea is a web. It's actually claims that relate to each other in a whole bunch of different ways, and no one is completely secure. We've talked about this before. But it's a lot more flexible. It doesn't fall apart or collapse on me. And the key image for meta-modernity is the pendulum, that we're living in the interplay between the subjective and the objective. The goal in modernity was to construct something, to build nations and institutions. The goal in post-modernity was to deconstruct things, to question them and destroy them. And the goal in meta-modernity is to rebuild them, to reconstruct them, building despite knowing the flaws. And the archetype is the science, the critic, and the maker. I put a whole bunch of stuff into Claude, and I said summarize it, and it was all this academic literature on this stuff. It was too on the nose. I had to change it. The cultural archetype that it gave me for meta-modernity was the builder. That we're called to build something. Even if one day it will fall down, even if we don't know how to do it, even if it is not permanent, we're going to build it. That's what we were made to do, is the core claim. And this somehow integrates something about my story that even though I know how churches can be, I'm committed to building one because I also know how they could be. I know they could be beautiful and amazing too. And so how do we rise to the occasion to build something that is beautiful and incredible, and people, amazing people like you, are proud to be a part of it? Ways that we talk about Dwell. Sometimes we say, what is Dwell called to that 10,000 other churches are not? Or sometimes we say, how do we build a church that the Bay Area wants to go to? Or sometimes we say that we just want to gather people that we adore and build a church that they would want to go to. Sometimes we say we want to be a new church for a new era. Sometimes we say we're on a quest to build a church where anyone can take a step closer to Jesus. But one of the ways we talked about it on the very first day of our very first leadership team meeting was, how do we build a church that is better the deeper you go into it? The more institutional layers deep you go, you don't find skeletons, you find a radiating bit of generosity and love. How do we build that? And we started by reading this book here, A Church Called Tov. Scott McKnight is a New Testament scholar who did this kind of wide-ranging analysis of what are the green flags of a church based on the gatherings in the New Testament. Here's his list. This is what a church that is good all the way down goes. This is what it looks like. A church that is good in its heart of hearts nurtures empathy. It prioritizes the feeling and experiences of others, particularly those who are marginalized or hurting. It nurtures grace, creating a culture of safety and unconditional acceptance rather than a power through fear dynamic. A grace-filled culture rejects punitive legalism and performance-based value systems. A church that is good inside nurtures a people-first culture, valuing the well-being of individuals within the congregation over organizational growth statistics or real estate. It nurtures truth, committing to absolute transparency, confession, and robust truth-telling. It nurtures justice, seeking equity and actively correcting systematic wrongs. It nurtures service, elevating ordinary acts of sacrificial service over celebrity culture and meritocracy. And it nurtures Christ-likeness, evaluating success based on how well the community reflects the character, goodness, and love of Jesus. When we say we're on a quest to build a church, that's what we mean. And when we say we have to be a listening church, that's our way of saying we have to build structures that guarantee this is what happens. This fall, I hope that we find ways to listen to this neighborhood even better. I hope we take a step deeper into listening to one another, how you have been experiencing God. And I hope that we keep layering on bit after bit of building this church so that we cannot help but land here. This is the dream of what Dwell Church could be. Let me pray for you all. Jesus, will you pour out your Spirit in such a way that this is what transpires among us? God, would you give us deep love for you and for each other and for this neighborhood? God, would we be a place that loves the right things the right way? God, we lift Dwell Church up to you. Would you guide us as we build it? Lord, I have always been confused. Are we planning it and you're growing it, or did you make it and we're building? I don't know. But would you help us to truly partner with you to build something that pleases you? God, we lift Dwell Church up to you. We love you, Jesus. Amen.